Kasi sa periodiko na papalabasin na si Antonio Sanchez. Now, Mr. President, this man, Sanchez, was convicted of nine counts of life imprisonment. Seven counts, Mr. President. Now, Mr. President, not only, sinabi ko 9 counts because there were 2 counts also of murder, Mr. President, against Nelson and Rickson Peñalosa, Mr. President. So, 9 counts of conviction ng life imprisonment, reclusion perpetua, Mr. President. Now, all of a sudden, because of a new law, I guess it slipped through the cracks, and this is where I argue for a budget for communication, effective communication. Because if the people don't know, we will all be hoodwinked. Madadaya tayo. Magkakaroon ng capricious, abusive conduct, Mr. President.
In the case of Sanchez, if he did that violation of terrible violation of placing drugs inside the statue of the Virgin Mary, he would only forfeit for that said month. For me, that is totally absurd. That is interpreting the law totally against the spirit of the Constitution, totally against the spirit of our philosophy on penal laws, Mr. President. So I think that is something that the good committee led by our very dynamic and eloquent chair should look into, Mr. President, because if we interpret these rules technically, he could commit all kinds of crimes. He could even kill somebody in prison, and he would only lose his good conduct allowances for the month. So I think we should have some qualifiers, if not in the law, then perhaps in the implementing rules, Mr. President. Just for the record, and again, I reiterate my support for the good gentleman, Mr. President.
There is another interpretation on that.
Of the personal attachment to this case. I was the one who prosecuted and had Sanchez convicted and sentenced to 7 life terms. The theory being that there were 7 of them in conspiracy, and the act of one is the act of all, and the penalty of one should be suffered by the rest of the 7, of the 6. And that is how the 7 life sentences came about, because there were 7 of them. So that is why he was sentenced to 7 life terms. However, the revised penal code provides that a penalty cannot exceed 40 years. Having said that, Mr. President, I can see the validity of the position taken by Senator Angara, of Senator Gordon. I just stand up in order to put a caution on the record, because an amendment to the law which will make clear
kidnap for ransom convicts that are applying for this particular GCTA, Good Conduct and Time Allowance. Mr. President, imagine the families that testified against these people, na ito mga balasubas will be allowed to go out again and be possibly a threat to these families. Nakakala nila nakakamit na silang hustisya, that they are going to be there for life. And this is not just on kidnap for ransom, many other instances of drug trafficking to other heinous crimes, Mr. President. And that is why a review needs to take place. We need to review the law, and I support the move of Senator Gordon. Maybe, for example, there's a provision in the law. And I'm not a lawyer, Mr. President. I do not pretend to be one, although sometimes we call ourselves murag abogado. Murag abogado in Visayas, parang abogado. Mr. President, but for everybody else, because if that happens, Mr. President, my worry is nobody will testify. Nobody will risk their life, knowing fully well that those guys will pretend and feign to be good people for the next 10 years, which has happened in the United States, by the way, Mr. President, and come out of jail and their lives